Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Thursday, September 11th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Until this week, firefighters with the U.S. Forest Service were not provided masks to protect them from the dangers of wildfire smoke.
What whistleblowers who work at the agency told me is that there was this resistance to sort of acknowledging how dangerous smoke is, because that could then come with costly consequences.
We will learn more about why the agency resisted masks and what's causing the about face. That conversation in just a moment, but first, these headlines. Conservative activist Charlie Kirk was shot and killed on Wednesday while speaking at Utah Valley University. Just last week, Kirk made a visit to Visalia. He spoke at a church fundraiser for a Tulare County pro-life organization. Matthew G. was at the event. He's a member of the Central Valley Young Republicans and used to work for Kirk's nonprofit, Turning Point USA.
Charlie was on fire last week. He was so energetic. He was so amusing. He was so funny. He was so on point.
G says the conservative community is now mourning a leader.
I'm really devastated and kind of heartbroken that it's come to this, that we, just because you don't believe in their policies or don't believe in their ideas, you have to go and take their life.
The motivation for the shooting is still unknown. Officials across the state released statements expressing their sympathy, including Governor Gavin Newsom, Fresno Mayor Jerry Dreier, and Bakersfield State Senator Shannon Grove. A long fight over San Joaquin Valley water rights is headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. News outlet SJV Water reports the dispute stems from decisions by the federal government to cut off water deliveries to the region during past droughts. The city of Fresno and several water agencies argue that the government took their property rights without proper compensation. The Supreme Court has agreed to take up the case, and the Bureau of Reclamation has 30 days to respond. The Garnet Fire has burned its way through the McKinley Grove of giant sequoias. As KVPR's Carrie Klein reports, fire officials are now assessing the damage of the fire that's burned more than 56,000 acres.
One concern now is the giant trees' very shallow root systems. Some fire is needed to help these trees survive, but too much can burn the roots or erode away the soil and cause the trees to topple. That's why in a Wednesday briefing, CAL FIRE Section Chief Don Fraguglia said boots are on the ground in the grove with water tenders.
We're making sure that the root gets cooled down as soon as possible. We're using water tenders in there to make sure that we limit the mortality in the sequoia grove.
Sprinklers were already running for days in the grove before the fire came through. Fire officials say that helped keep flame intensity low. Containment on the fire is slowly growing. Firefighters say they've installed multiple fire lines to protect Shaver Lake and Toll House. For KVPR News, I'm Carrie Klein.
2 men's basketball players from Fresno State have been permanently banned by the NCAA for betting on their own games. An investigation found players Michael Robinson and Jalen Weaver, along with San Jose State's Steven Vasquez, shared thousands in gambling payouts. The NCAA alleges that 2 of the players even changed how they played to influence game outcomes during this past season. All 3 players have been removed from their teams, but neither school was punished. A Bakersfield-based clean energy project has survived the Trump administration's rollback of renewable subsidies. A $6 million federal award for a geothermal energy storage project in Kern County remains intact so far, according to the Bakersfield Californian. The project would be the first in the country to inject heated water into oil wells to generate electricity. Project representatives say federal officials have not finalized the award, but do plan to be in Bakersfield for a kickoff ceremony next month.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, leading the industry in the IIHS 2025 Top Safety Pick Awards, helping move Mazda closer to the goal of eliminating traffic fatalities. More information and the Mazda digital showroom available at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our main story. The air has been hazy in eastern Fresno County for weeks now. That's because of smoke impacts from the Garnet Fire, which has been raging in the Sierra National Forest since late August. And while some of us may have been hanging indoors lately to avoid the poor air quality, imagine being on the front lines of that fire without anything to protect you from breathing in the smoke. For fires on federal lands like the Garnet, that's what wildland firefighters have been facing. In fact, for decades, masks have actually been banned for these firefighters. And the chemicals in that smoke can cause serious health effects, including cancer. But a landmark decision this week by the U.S. Forest Service means masks will now be available. That is, if firefighters will wear them. To find out why masks are so controversial for wildland firefighters, I spoke with Hannah Dreier, an investigative reporter for the New York Times. As part of her recent reporting, Hannah spoke with many firefighters who've gotten sick from inhaling smoke on the job. She starts our conversation by explaining the types of toxins that firefighters encounter while working.
Scientists have found more than 31 carcinogens in wildfire smoke. And this is something that we've actually known about going all the way back to the 1980s. There used to be this idea that wildfire smoke was sort of benign. It was like a campfire. But in the 80s, firefighters started getting really sick on some of these wildfires. And researchers started looking into what exactly is in the smoke. And what they found was just a stew of toxins and carcinogens.
In August, you released an in-depth report about wildland firefighters' exposure to these contaminants. And you write that some firefighters are getting cancer in their 20s, they're getting heart disease in their 30s, some in their 40s are waiting for lung transplants. You and your Times colleagues spoke with dozens of firefighters, and I was wondering if there was a particular story that you could highlight that you could relay to us that really stood out to you.
One person who I spent a lot of time talking with was a man named Fernando Allende. He is from Los Angeles, and he was one of the first on the scene at the LA fires in January. He's a young guy, healthy. He was 32, and he had spent his career working for the Forest Service, responding to wildfires. He said that smoke was black. It choked him. It smelled like plastic. It just seemed toxic when he was in it. But he told me that he figured that it was probably safe for him to be out there because that's the policy of his employer. And he developed a cough. A lot of the people I talked to said that their first sign was this cough that just didn't go away. And a couple months later, doctors found cancer nodules all through his lungs. And he had developed a really aggressive form of cancer. His doctor said just probably in the weeks before he was diagnosed this summer. And he connects that back to his exposure in Los Angeles. A lot of the people who I spoke with said that they had never really considered that this job could sicken them until they got really sick. And then they realized, like, what have I been working in? What have I exposed myself to?
Your report specifically centers around U.S. Forest Service firefighters and how the agency was not supplying them with masks to protect themselves from exposure to these contaminants. And that's because the Forest Service banned its teams from wearing masks. Now, I'll note that there's been a big update on this story this week, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, Hannah, historically, why has the Forest Service been so resistant to giving their firefighters masks?
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of known that this smoke is dangerous and bad for decades. And for decades, the Forest Service has been getting the same recommendation from its own internal researchers, which is the smoke is dangerous. It's important to find a way to give these workers masks. What the Forest Service said is that they worried about heat stress. They worried that if they gave firefighters masks, they might overheat. It's true that the work is very physical. But in other countries, wildland firefighters are now given masks routinely, and there hasn't been an uptick in heat deaths or heat stroke. What whistleblowers who work at the agency told me is that there was this resistance to sort of acknowledging how dangerous smoke is, because that could then come with costly consequences, like having to hire more workers. It could make it harder to recruit. The agency worried it could be on the hook for a lot of medical expenses. So there was this tension where everybody sort of understood that smoke was bad, and yet workers weren't given a way to protect themselves.
And it's important to note there is a distinction between urban firefighters and wildland firefighters. Could you briefly discuss what that difference is?
Yes, this is so important. So, urban firefighters are those guys with the red trucks who are in cities and towns fighting fires when houses go up in flames or buildings go up in flames. You see them all the time. Everybody sort of knows who they are. Wildland firefighters are a totally different kind of firefighter that you pretty much never see. They hike deep into the woods in these crews of 20 people, and then they contain fires by sort of building these moats around the fire. And they're doing their work really out of sight because they're out in a forest or they're, working in cities when fires sweep into cities. And there's usually a police line that's sort of preventing you from going to where they're working. The type of work is really different. It's really physical, and it's done in these remote places. So they can't wear the kind of masks that urban firefighters wear. That's like a compressed air tank and a mask that seals to your face. You just can't lug that like all the way into the forest.
Sure.
And so instead, in other countries, that the wildland firefighters wear half-face respirators.
So as I mentioned earlier, you just had an update on your reporting this week that the Forest Service announced that it will switch course and now provide masks to its firefighters, despite banning them for decades before. So what caused the sudden reversal?
I mean, this is something that safety advocates have been pushing for truly decades. And I think it was just the attention that was suddenly on the Forest Service around this issue. So we published our first story on this topic a few weeks ago, and there was a flurry of activity in Congress with letters going over to the Forest Service demanding answers. The Forest Service chief was called before an oversight hearing. And what people inside the agency said is they started really looking for things that they could do to get a mask policy in place. And just on Monday, they reversed course, like you say, and firefighters will now be able to wear masks.
You primarily focused on the Forest Service for your reporting, but you did touch on mask mandates for CAL FIRE firefighters. So what's California doing to protect its firefighters?
California is actually way out ahead of this issue. So there's not a mask mandate yet in California. California firefighters also go out into the woods and are just inhaling smoke with no protection. But Cal OSHA, which controls safety standards for the state, just this week started circulating a draft rule that would make a mask mandate for California firefighters. And that would be huge. It would be the first rule like that anywhere in this country.
Getting back to the Forest Service real quick, with their firefighters at least now having access to these masks, with the experts you spoke to, did they say if there's anything else that can be done to protect these firefighters? Is this just the start, or where do we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of things sort of moving just in the past couple weeks on this. So the Forest Service is also looking at how to have cleaner air in the heavy equipment that people use to fight fires. So like bulldozers, things like that, even the trucks that these firefighters are riding out in, those also get full of smoke, and they're sort of easier to clean if you can come up with a filtration system. And then they're also looking at where these firefighters sleep. Right now, they often sleep in valleys that can get choked with smoke when there's a big fire burning. And they're starting to think about what other steps could be taken to at least let these firefighters sleep in clean air, even if they're out working during the day in smoke.
Hannah Dreier, investigative reporter with the New York Times. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And if you would like to hear more about what it's actually like being a wildland firefighter, you can check out our July 14th episode. I spoke with Kelly Ramsey, who discusses her experience as the only woman on an elite hotshot crew in her book titled Wildfire Days: A Woman, a Hotshot Crew, and the Burning American West. And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
It's rare to find a podcast that can actually change your life. But when the show's called Life Kit, that's kind of the whole point. I'm Marielle Segarra. 3 times a week on the Life Kit podcast, we guide you through a topic we could all use help with, from personal development to healthy living to managing your dinero, with takeaways so you can start living what you learn right away. Escucha el Life Kit podcast from NPR.